Hello, hello. Jim Turner from Money Meets Medicine. Thanks so much for watching this video. We're going to continue our lecture series, our Sunday afternoon, or I guess late morning, depending on where you're watching this lecture series. And we're going to jump off from where we started last time. So we're going to be talking about the cash flow waterfall part, and more specifically on investing versus paying off debt, retirement specifically. And so we're going to go ahead and dive in. As a reminder, this cash flow waterfall is built on the premise that you're already making automatic payments toward your mandatory payments, right? So your student loan payments are having their minimum payment. Your life and disability insurance are already happening. Your monthly payments for any other kind of debt that you may have is already happening. And so this is something in addition to that, which is important to mention as we kind of dive into this series on on paying off your debt or not. I got to fix my microphone, having some technical issues. All right. So, all that said, let's go ahead and dive into this. You'll remember this is the 10-step cash flow waterfall that I put in front of you last time. And so we talked about building an emergency fund. We talked about, 401k match, a high interest debt being paid off. Spoke a little bit about real deal emergency funds, that 3 to 6 month emergency fund, as well as charitable giving and where that would take place in this for you. So now we're going to talk a little bit about paying off some student loan debt, medium interest debt, and then meeting your annual savings goal before we talk about low interest debt. Before we dive into that, I just want to mention, kind of put something out there. It's called the Financial Foundation Program. I'm currently creating this in the background. You can expect this to include a student loan consult, a career coaching call once a year, access to the MDFU or Medical Degree Financial University curriculum, and then complimentary disability insurance quote. So if you want more information about that, make sure to sign up for the newsletter at moneymeetsmedicine.com. This allows you to get the weekly email from me about what's going on. And I look forward to sharing more information about that as it comes out, as we build this in the background. So in terms of the next steps, paying off student loans, this comes with a pretty massive caveat, right? So this is actually mentioned in the last lecture. But when it comes to student loans, there are really kind of two groups of people. And so there are three options, right? They are to pay it back yourself, to seek forgiveness, or to forbear on your debt, like I did when I didn't know anything about personal finance. So really, you have two options, right? Which is to pay it back yourself or to seek public service loan forgiveness or long-term forgiveness. We'll talk about that more in the next lecture series, actually. And so if you're sitting here trying to figure this out, right, whether you should pay it back yourself versus seek public service loan forgiveness, it's complicated. It involves math. It involves a consult. It involves, really speaking to somebody about your individual situation. That said, as a rule of thumb, a guide, a principle, you might consider the debt to income ratio. So if your debt to income ratio is less than 1, this is when you could consider refinancing or paying it back yourself. Now, I wouldn't be particularly excited about this option right now in a high interest rate environment, but if you're watching this live video, 2, 3, 4 years from now and the interest rates have come back down, you might consider refinancing only when you can get a substantially better rate than what your federal debt is. For those with a debt to income ratio greater than or equal to 1, that's when you really need to consider public service loan forgiveness or long-term forgiveness. This is when it becomes extremely challenging to pay off the debt yourself. And so with the debt to income ratio of less than 1, you might consider paying it back yourself. You just follow the waterfall in that situation. If it's greater than 1, you're really going to consider that forgiveness as an option for you. And so as an example, what do I mean by this? Well, a debt to income ratio of less than 1 would be, in an example of $250,000 in annual income, you own $200,000 in loans. Your debt to income ratio is less than 1, right? This is specifically for your attending physician income, right? So this is, if you're in training watching this video, this is your anticipated attending physician income. Obviously, you don't make $250,000 most likely. As a resident, if you do, kudos for you. A debt to income ratio of greater than 1 is when your loans start to become larger than your income, right? So in that situation, it becomes significantly more and more painful as that number goes up to pay it off yourself. And so this is when public service loan forgiveness really starts to make a lot more sense. Okay. And so that said, we're not talking about student loans today, in full. And so anytime someone puts this in front of you, this idea that you need to consider refinancing your money, you need to know that blogs, websites, places where this happens, they get kickbacks from this, right? So you refinance your loans, you get a $750, gift card or whatever. Well, so does the person that's telling you to refinance. And so I like to make it abundantly clear when it comes to this that you should never privately refinance your loans outside of federal government programs, right? To refinance with, a private bank. If you aren't absolutely 1000% certain that you're not going to be doing public service loan forgiveness. I can't iterate this enough because unfortunately in this space, I get emails all the time. Hey, Jimmy, I've got these student loans. I've got $400,000 student loans. I make 250 grand. I'm really looking into my options. What should I do? I work at, a qualifying hospital. And then I find out that they refinanced. Well, guess what? Now you're not able to get public service loan forgiveness. So never, never, never refinance your student loans until you are 100% certain. You've done the math, you've gotten a consult, wherever you get that information, you've learned about this stuff yourself. Do not privately refinance until you've determined that you are not pursuing public service loan forgiveness, even if your debt to income ratio is less than 1. Okay. So all that said, in the cash flow waterfall, paying off your student loans falls into, that seventh step, if you will. And so given that information, you need to know that this step only falls into the waterfall if you're planning to pay it off yourself. If you're in that public service loan forgiveness group or you're in that long-term forgiveness group, your job is to simply make your minimum payment, right? So if you are seeking forgiveness, you can look at this list over here and basically cross this one out because you're just making your minimum payment and you're just going to keep going down the waterfall with any additional cash flow that you have through bonuses, raises, or spending less and saving more, right? There's a variety of ways to increase your cash flow, but if you're going to seek forgiveness, just imagine this isn't here, make your minimum payment, okay? So if in the PSLF group, you should be automating your monthly student loan payment, just like your disability insurance payment or your rent or your mortgage or your car payment. It is just meeting the minimum. You're doing PSLF, this comes off the list, okay? That's when we kind of move to this, let's say this medium interest debt group, right? So we consider this to be 4 to 8% interest, and my face is in the way. And so in this situation, you might, consider things like car payments. It might be mortgages nowadays. Back when the mortgages were 2 or 3%, that was low interest debt. Well, guess what? Now mortgages are high interest debt, or excuse me, higher interest debt. They're kind of in that medium interest debt group, which makes for a really interesting situation. Like this classic, should I pay off my mortgage or should I invest for retirement becomes a tougher challenge to discuss. And the reason why is because mortgage rates are substantially higher. And so you might have some questions about this. You toss in the chat. I'm happy to kind of dialogue back and forth about it. But suffice it to say, more traditional medium interest debt, that's where you pay this off. And the reason why is because you're not guaranteed to get this return in the market, right? So this is a guaranteed return of 4 to 8%, as opposed to when you're starting to meet your annual savings goal, right? You are stepping into the territory of trying to save for retirement. Well, you're not guaranteed a return. Now, over long periods of time, right? We talked about investing a little bit. We'll talk about it more in the future. Over long periods of time, you can expect that annual return to be, kind of on the up and up, right? That's the way that investing works, but it's not a guaranteed return. So if you told me that I could get a guaranteed 8%, right, by paying off 8% debt, like an auto loan that's at 8%, or, let's just put a G here to mark this guaranteed, or I could get a potential 6 to 8% return that is variable, right? I am going to take this 8% guaranteed every time. And the reason why is because it's guaranteed. That's worth something. It's not an apples to apples comparison. But let's say that you paid off your medium interest debt. You've gotten to the point where you're like below 4 or 5% guaranteed. This is when you're going to start meeting your annual savings goal. Remembering that earlier in the cash flow waterfall, you've already gotten enough to get matching. You've already filled up your 401k or 403b. So it's not like you're not investing at all. So I don't want that to be missed here. You are putting that in there, your 23 grand or whatever at the time that you're watching this video, and maxing out your 401k or your 403b. You're maxing out your retirement plans, some of them that you have. That said, if you are going to be in the situation of having extra cash flow after you pay off that medium interest debt, now we're talking about, well, we need to save for retirement. And the question's always like, Jimmy, how much do I need to save? Again, you need to run the math. In an investing lecture in a future series, I'll show you how to actually do that on your own, personal situation based on, how much you want to spend in retirement, what your current age is. I can point you to a calculator to help you kind of figure that out. So what I'm about to talk about right now is, again, it's another rule of thumb. It's a guide. It's a framework, but this isn't the hard and fast, definite sort of thing. What most of the financial space will tell you to do is just save 20%. And in fact, if you're not a physician, oftentimes you'll hear just save 10 or 15%. If you save 10 to 15% finishing training in your early to mid 30s and you haven't saved a dime for retirement, saving 10 to 15% is most likely going to land you in a situation where you are unable to retire by the age that you want. In fact, most physicians want to retire at the age of 60. And it turns out that the average age a physician actually retires is the age of 69. This has been studied. And the reason why is because people don't save enough money. And so if you want to be financially independent, have that financial freedom, the opportunity to retire, practice medicine because you want to, not because you have to, saving 20% is going to get you to that goal around the age of 60 to 65. However, there's a lot of people watching, and this is more and more common nowadays. We're like, you know what? I may not retire from medicine. I really like practicing medicine, but I would like to have the option to practice medicine because I want to, not because I have to, much earlier than the age of 60 to 65. That's where this rule of 30 comes in. So I call this the 30% rule, right? Which is saving 30% of typically your gross income. Okay. Now, this may seem challenging, particularly when you're finishing training, you have high student loan payments, that sort of thing. But figuring out how much you need to save by the age that you want is fundamentally important, because what will happen is you'll inflate your lifestyle and it'll be very difficult to approach this number. Now, after you do the math, you might realize, actually, I don't need to save 30%. Like, I've saved a lot early on, and I'm going to coast fire, which is the idea of saving a decent amount early and then letting that money that you've saved kind of coast while you continue to work. And that money will continue to grow. You won't have to save a lot more. You can actually save less. But to start out, when you're finishing training, I recommend 30% as a good goal. You can consider placing your student loan payment towards this 30% number until your student loans are gone. So this is a wealth accumulation rate. That's where the 30% rule comes from. It's the idea of how much money are you putting towards your student loans plus investing for retirement in the future. If you're approaching 30%, you're doing a great job. You're going to get to your financial goals. So let's use an example. Let's say that there's an annual income of $300,000. We're going to take this 30%, right? That's going to make this $90,000 number. Should probably use a different color there. And so we're going to try to save $90,000 towards our annual savings goal as we've worked down this 10-step cash flow waterfall. I'll show it to you again here in a second. But this annual savings goal, let's work through this, right? These are the accounts that are available for my family, okay? The accounts that are going to be available for yours may be different. You might have a cash balance plan, right? You might have a pension. You might have different things that are available to you that aren't available to me. But the order in which I'm going to be doing this is in terms of tax efficiency, okay? So I'm going to be saving to my $90,000 based on a $300,000 income in a tax efficient manner. And so the first place that I'm going to put something is into a health savings account. Again, not an investing lecture, but very briefly, this is the only triple tax advantaged account that exists. You put pre-tax money into an HSA, it grows pre-tax, continues to grow. And then when you take it out, if you take it out on healthcare expenses, it never gets taxed. So you put it in pre-tax and it never gets taxed. That's the only account like that exists. And so sometimes people will call this a stealth IRA or a stealth 401k, or they'll call it a triple tax advantaged account. And when you turn the age of 65, if you take it out for other non-medical needs, it basically turns into an extra 401k. Okay, so worst case scenario, use it on non-medical expenses later. It's a 401k. Best case scenario, you spend it on healthcare, like the vast majority of us have extensive costs when we're in our elder years. It's going to be able to be pre-tax money. It continues to grow, never gets taxed, even when you take it out. So that's the first place for my family that we're going to put that. Now, if you have type 1 diabetes, or you know that you have cancer, you're on chemo treatments or long-term healthcare costs you're going to be experiencing every year, don't let the healthcare, the retirement savings of an HSA wag the insurance needs, right? You need to take care of your insurance needs, but if an HSA makes sense, it's a great plan. So we're going to put our first $8,300 there. That's what I can put in max for a family. My wife, 3 kids. And so the next thing we're going to do is put our money into a 401k, right? So you see this up here, this 401k. So we're going to put $23,000 in. Now, my employer matches some of that money and contributes to some of that money. And so part of my 30% rule is actually going to come out of part of my employer's money. And the reason why is because that's part of my salary, right? That's part of my compensation package, if you will. And so if I had a $300,000 income and I was getting matching, I would count that toward my 30% rule. So this kind of eases that a little bit, and is one of the reasons when you're comparing jobs, you should not just look at the salary. You should look at the benefits that come with it so that you make sure you're comparing apples to apples. Oftentimes people say, oh, well, I've got this $300,000 job, and then I've got this $325,000 job. And so I'm going to take the 325 because otherwise they're the same. And they don't realize that their employer gives them $40,000 in matching and contributions. Well, if you base your entire decision on these two very similar jobs in the same area on that logic, you'd actually be wrong, right? So this is going to be the next step. The reason why is because it's pre-tax, put it in. I'm in a high peak earning years situation, so I'm not going to favor Roth right now. I'm going to favor pre-tax savings because I expect my tax rate, if you will, in retirement to be potentially lower at that point. So I'm going to take the tax savings now, take the tax hit later because I'm in my peak earning years. The next thing, 457 plan. This is something that's very, very, kind of unique to every person's situation. So 457 plans, not going to get in the nitty gritty here, but all I will say at this point is that you need to read the document that you get from HR. You need to read your 457 plan, understand the distribution options, what kind of things you can invest in, what the fees are, and then, how quickly can you take this thing out? In addition to, what is the financial situation of the employer that's providing this 457 plan? If it's not good, there's a good chance you might not want to invest in it. If this is a governmental 457, right? So you work for, let's say, for the state of North Carolina, because that's where I am. If it's a governmental 457, you can basically view that as an extra 401k, because in order for that money to go away, the government itself would have to default. It's pretty safe. So for you, if you're an individual hospital that's not a governmental 457, think really hard before you do this. If you have one, just view it as an extra 401k. And again, you may not even need to do this if your savings goal isn't $90,000, but that's what it is in this scenario, right? And then we're going to fill up a Roth IRA. So we've done no tax, pre-tax, and now we're finally doing post-tax, right? So if this is pre, and the reason why is because we're going down this thing in terms of tax efficiency, right? To get to our 30% rule goal. And if you've added up all these numbers, you're going to see that we got to our $93,000, and some of that wasn't even what we contributed, right? So it ended up being more like, $70,000 that we have contributed from our $300,000 gross income. But either way, this 30% rule is going to get you pretty close to where you want to be for the ability to be financially independent or financially free in your earlier years. It's going to be much sooner than 60 to 65 if you graduated traditional age out of residency or fellowship, or if you're an advanced practice provider watching this, in your even earlier years. Saving early, time in the market, one of the most fundamental pieces of investing. The way that you think through this annual savings goal, though, is through tax efficiency, getting to 30% of your gross income. And this number here would assume that your student loans are gone, because you might be placing some of your money towards student loans, and that should count towards that 30% until they're gone. Finally, you're going to pay off your low interest debt. And so this is kind of step 10. And I consider that to be anything less than 4%. And again, this is all with additional cash flow that you might make from a bonus or a raise or a job change or what have you. And this is the point at which you'd consider paying that off. You'll note that I don't recommend paying off all your debt before you invest. There are some gurus out there that will do that. I think that completely ignores time in the market and the importance of investing early. So I'm not a big fan of that. I think it's actually really terrible financial advice, particularly for medical professionals. And so you'll see that that's what we recommend here. So if we go back to, give me one second, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what's coming up next. But if we go back to the 10-step cash flow waterfall that we've been talking through, you'll see that a lot of this is based on the interest rate that you can anticipate getting as you do that, right? So pre-tax, this is 100% return on your money. Then you're going to do high interest debt. You're going to make sure you have a real emergency fund so that you don't go back into debt, right? So you avoid credit cards. Charitable giving goal from a position of strength that we talked about. You're going to max out your 401k, because now we're starting to see like that variable versus guaranteed number starts to make a lot of sense. And then you're going to do your medium interest debt. You're going to meet your annual savings goal. And then finally, you're going to pay off your low interest debt last. Okay. So this is the 10-step cash flow waterfall that you can use as cash flow comes in. And I'm super excited. So hopefully this made sense to you. If you have questions, Jimmy@moneymeetsmedicine.com. I'm always happy to answer them. But I'm going to give you a little sneak peek into what we're going to be doing for our next lecture series. So we're actually going to be running through some student loan case scenarios. So I'm actually going to, take information from the Money Meets Medicine audience. People submitted some of their student loan information to me. I'm going to run through those like a consult, provide them to you. And assuming that you have a similar situation, you're a single resident, we're talking through a single resident scenario, or, maybe you're a married attending in a common community property state like California, and you kind of like tag these pieces together to help work toward potentially what your plan is if you want to dive into that more deeply. And of course, you need professional help, then you can, reach out to me. We're creating the Financial Foundation program that I mentioned at the very beginning of this. And so that student loan consult will be a part of that. But I want to provide tons of value so you can understand student loans and do this on your own if you're able to. So we'll talk through, different plans. Maybe people are filing joint and, the different plans and what they'd save annually if they paid that. We'll talk about, save versus new IBR, show you the numbers there based on the audience's various situations that they've sent to me. I've had a good number of these actually submitted, so we'll be able to do these for a little while. And so long as they're helpful for the audience and really thinking through their student loan situation, we'll probably continue this series on student loans starting next week for a good while so that you can see, should I file separate? Should I file joint? Send an email out to the audience today, just kind of discussing that idea, right? If you don't have time to get a student loan consult, you're not sure, you haven't, really dove into this yourself. If you file separate, you can amend a joint later, right? If you file joint, you can't amend a separate. So if you're in that situation, you're trying to figure out should you file separately or joint, and you haven't had time to get a consult, you haven't had time to learn about student loans and figure out your plan, file separate because you can always change it to joint if you made a mistake, right? But you can't go backwards the other direction. All this and more in the student loan lecture series that we're going to be talking about in the coming time. But hopefully for now, this cash flow waterfall was helpful for you in terms of the order of operations of investing versus paying off debt, and the way you can do that. There are other ways to do this, of course. But that said, this is a way to do it that will get you to your goals. And if you just want to know what to do and you don't, really want to know all of the reasons behind it, hopefully this 10-step cash flow waterfall that we talked about in this live and in the live before this are helpful to you. If you have questions, feel free to email me, Jimmy@moneymeetsmedicine.com. Make sure to sign up for the email list, the newsletter list, and download a free copy of the Physician Philosopher's Guide to Personal Finance. You can do all of that at moneymeetsmedicine.com. And I look forward to sharing the program that we're going to be doing, the Financial Foundation program at Money Meets Medicine, consult, career coaching call, access to a video curriculum, and more. And we're going to make that at a price that honestly physicians in training can afford. That's the entire goal of this year, is providing financial literacy and help to physicians in training, early career attendings, other medical professionals that need it. So appreciate you being here. Thanks for being part of the community. And I will see you next week. Cheers.